Sometimes we make leadership very difficult, and in a lot of ways, it's pretty simple concepts that make people successful. When we have new leaders, I try to coach them on people go one of three ways, usually as a leader. They will go a fear-based route. They will go the route of becoming personal friends with their employees. And the third opportunity is the hard one. That's earning people's respect.
What does it take for us as leaders to earn respect from the people we lead? Respect that is genuine, respect that is deep, respect that is lasting. I'm your host, Tim Spiker, and this is the Be Worth Following podcast, a production of the People Forward Network. On this show, we talk with exceptional leaders, thinkers, and researchers about what actually drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. You just heard from Mike Goebel, CEO of Parker Adventist Hospital. Mike's formula for earning the respect of those he leads is to create high-trust environments by leaning hard into exceptional transparency. Throughout his career in the healthcare industry, Mike has led numerous organizations through extremely difficult situations, including bringing the company back from bankruptcy and, of course, weathering the storm of COVID-19. No matter the circumstances, Mike chooses transparency. And on top of that, he chooses to look in the mirror first when problems arise. Given that, it's not surprising that respect and trust are hallmarks of Mike's leadership. People within organizations take their behavioral cues from their leadership teams. In our conversation, you'll hear how that relates to the difference between what Mike calls a demanded culture versus a demonstrated culture. Mike also shares a valuable perspective that informs his leadership called the MOM test. In Mike's experience, a little encouragement goes a long way when it comes to getting the very best out of people. Let's jump into the conversation there.
There's a book called The Art of Killing Kudzu, and it's a book that really brings to light people are intrinsically motivated. It's more about encouragement than it is motivate. It's about drawing on people's makeup and their character to really get the best out of them.
I certainly agree with that perspective. When we get into the issue of motivation, when we're talking with our clients, we talk about how do you unleash the motivation within somebody. And that idea of unleashing was very intentional to align with just exactly what you were talking about. Let's unpack that idea just a little bit, because I think there is an important difference between I've got to somehow implant motivation with somebody versus the perspective they have something within them and it's my job to figure out a way for that to come out. How does that change the way you approach motivating others when you're looking to unleash something versus implant something?
I have a true belief that most people show up every day wanting to do a good job. It's about putting people in the right situation for their talent. And I had the chance years ago to go to a seminar called The Disney Approach to People Management. And there was a leader in Epcot that runs the British, it's a store, it's a restaurant, as well as they sell some trinkets. And he talked about these British students that come over with a trunk full of their belongings. And it's not like you can work them for a week and say, okay, you're not working out, go home. And he talked about this one employee that, he had him work as a bus person. He had him work as a waiter. He had him work at the front cashier, and they just were failing. And so he finally put him out front of the store, and he said they flourished. And so it's really about creating an environment that people can flourish in versus trying to motivate somebody to do something they may not want to do.
You're talking about tapping into something that's already there versus trying to conjure it. And for any of us, when we get placed in circumstances where we can naturally thrive, I mean, admittedly, I don't know anybody who has a job that's all sunshine and rainbows all the time, but if you can figure out a spot where most of the time you're getting a chance to be in a space and do things that you are made to do things that you enjoy doing, of course you're going to do better if you're in roles and circumstances where you flourish.
People have skills, you can build their skills. Knowledge comes with experience. talent is something most people are born with. So it's a matter of finding out where's their talent and then helping them build the skills and knowledge to have that talent flourish. And, promoting people sometimes too fast or not giving them the skills to succeed, that's on us as leaders to figure out where people fit and how to help them flourish with their
There-
innate values and talent.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about the times when you place somebody into a role and you have high hopes and expectations and it doesn't work out, and how quickly many of us are tempted to immediately place blame at the feet of that individual. How come they don't get it? How come they just won't? Versus looking in the mirror and saying, okay, I got to figure out step 2 here in order to help this person be successful. And I think your example with Disney to say, they're here for 6 months, I can't just say, sorry, it's not working out, kind of forces the issue onto the leader, when in reality, we should probably, I would say, we would all do well to take that level of responsibility anyway and just say, hey, if it's not working out, let me first start with the head, and that is me as the leader.
Absolutely. As a leader, you have to take the responsibility to say, if somebody's failing, it might be the situation I put them in or the lack of training that they have. And I own that too.
Well, you mentioned a couple of key ideas that you and I had spoken of previously, and I want folks to get a chance to hear about these values that you lean into, and high trust, transparency, and expectations. These things I know are core to your belief system as a leader and how you practical every day. So talk to us a little bit about those three, why they're so important to you, and how you actually live those high ideals out, or at least attempt to.
Well, I think it comes from my experience. I think with some things that I learned in my career. Early in my career, I worked for an organization, a long-term care organization that got into some financial trouble. It was serious. I mean, it ended up being a Chapter 11 situation, and I was asked to be the CEO of the company, not because I was so wildly qualified. There was nobody else in line for the job, but there were 1,500 employees. There was 15 different long-term care facilities. But in bankruptcy, people did not know whether they were going to be paid, because once you file a bankruptcy petition, there's a very hard line in the sand, and everything that was due to anybody prior to that filing is called pre-petition expenses. And we had employees that were caught with vacation that wasn't paid, all sorts of expense reports that weren't paid, as well as employees not knowing what their future was. And because we had an environment that was high trust and highly transparent, and if people asked me a tough question, I gave them an answer. And they came to work every day. And there was a period where we had to go to court to even guarantee our employees any kind of a paycheck for 3 months at the corporate office. I mean, obviously, the nursing homes, you got to have employees to take care of the residents of the facility. So we had to, give people a sense of calmness in a storm where you don't know what's going to happen. And I learned from that if you're honest, you're forthright, people ask you tough questions, and you give them straight answers, they will go to the mat for you. I've worked in organizations that were not high trust environments. So I know what that looks like. Or people are telling you things and you're suspicious of whether it's the truth. And so I think building on high trust, high transparent organizations, situations is what I've seen be successful in some very tough situations.
What kind of advice would you give? I'm thinking about younger leaders who are coming up in corporate organizations, and this idea of transparency feels foreign. Maybe they're in an environment that doesn't practice that's a little bit more on the, let's just say, the marketing side of communication, even internal communication. How can we communicate this where it's just true enough and we can keep the troops calm, versus this idea of let's lean into transparency? How would you advise that younger up and coming leader who is not used to that kind of transparency?
Obviously working for someone you trust and have a relationship with, I think is really important to my job satisfaction. That's the way I've always worked. Yeah, sometimes maybe the senior leaders of an organization haven't been the most transparent, but I felt like the person I directly worked for was somebody I highly trusted and felt like they would tell me the truth. And if they knew something, they would tell me what they knew. That went a long ways. Not every organization is going to feel the need to be totally transparent. I think that's a mistake. There's risks to every business, and it's a matter of we all try to take calculated risks and do the right thing. But yeah, I think sometimes it's coming down to a relationship with your immediate supervisor is important and trying to build that relationship.
It's interesting. I'm thinking about on some experiences, some conversations that I've been in with even senior leaders as we're talking about what does it mean to be honest, which sounds like a really, really simple question. But when you sit high up in organizations, you have access to tons of information other people don't necessarily have. You almost get into what's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and who gets those different levels.
Right.
But having heard from that leader, who's one of the client that I'm thinking of, is one of the best leaders I've ever been around, there came the discussion around personal finances. And very similar to what you're talking about, there was a line drawn there and said, no matter what, we've got to be honoring of that. And even encouraging younger leaders in the organization to be protective of that. He gave the example. I remember he gave the example that you've got an employee who is all excited because they're about to go buy that first house, but you know that layoffs are coming. And you also know that you're quote unquote not allowed to say anything about it. And basically what he said is, you have to figure out a way. You have to figure out a way to let that employee know. And what I heard in that, because this is amazing, this is a senior leader in a publicly traded company who is basically telling people, you've got to figure out a way to take care of people with truth. You can't let them run over that ledge. And ultimately what he was communicating was a commitment to the individual. That's how we're going to be great as an organization. We're going to be great corporately, culturally, if you can be committed to the individuals. And I just thought that was a really interesting conversation. And given what you shared, you're reminding me of that conversation.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I've had that situation where had somebody come into my office all excited, they're going to buy a house. I said, look, I'm sorry to tell you this, but we're going to be eliminating your position. And they took it really well. That person went and told several other people that, hey, they were honest with me. That's the story. Now, I'm sure somebody could say, yeah, they just wrecked my ability to buy a house, but I'll take that risk every day. Yeah, because I think being honest and forthright, that just goes a long way. Says who you are, says what kind of an organization you are to many other employees.
I know when it comes to the issue of culture, that you have some thoughts about the difference between demonstrating culture and demanding culture. And I think it'll be helpful for people to get a chance to hear about that framing because I think there's value in it. Talk about that a little bit if you could.
Obviously, people will model what you do. And so I've worked in organizations where somebody was demanding certain behaviors, but they didn't live them, versus situations where people do what they ask you to do. And, you say it in your book, Patrick Lencioni says it in his books, that people watch everything we do. And just like with our parents or our kids watching us, employees look for disconnects. You say you want a high trust environment. Are you trustworthy? Or if you want a transparent organization, because the benefits of that is people tell me things that I need to know. But if I say I want a transparent environment, so I know what's going on, they know what's going on, but I'm not transparent when somebody asks me a question, then people are not going to be transparent. Truly living it, people will model it and follow it. It's much easier to get the culture you want if you model what that culture is.
Okay. So when I hear you talking about demonstration versus demand, it sounds to me, and tell me if I'm on base or off base here, that the do as I say, not as I do idea when it comes to developing culture just doesn't work very well. It's really rooted in the fact that am I modeling the type of organization that I'm asking of everybody else?
Yep, that's more succinctly than I said it. Yeah.
Well, but I think it's so important because sometimes we have these, and I've been involved in these, kind of a big cultural initiative. We want to help move the organization in this direction or that culturally, and there is an effort, and we're going to tell stories and we're going to promote it, and all that's well and good when you're trying to take an organization somewhere.
Right.
But if the people, especially the people who are saying, here's who we want to be, if their behavior is not modeling the thing that they say they want, the credibility, obviously, it disappears pretty quickly.
Absolutely. To me, what you get in an environment where culture is demanded but not demonstrated is you get compliance. So people will be compliant, try to make it look like they're following you, but they're not. And I've been in situations where you become compliant, but people quit taking risk in that situation. And instead of, throwing out the best ideas, taking some risk of failure, because usually in the situations I've been in, it becomes somewhat of a fear-based culture if you're not complying, and people quit taking risks. So the company gets handcuffed. It's not demonstrating its best ability. You're not getting the best out of people because they become guarded, they become compliant, just trying to, in the most extreme situations, survive.
I'm thinking back to so many times, more than I could count, when I hear really exceptional leaders talk about the value of the people that they are leading being willing to take risks. And when you share this story, though, where I love the boomerang of this is it's coming back on the leader to say, am I creating an environment where we're going to be able to live beyond the concept of compliance? Are we modeling the environment? Because if we're just demanding and not demonstrating, to use your words, that leads into compliance. And so you could stand on top of the mountain all day long and say, take wise risks, take wise risks. But if you're demanding and not demonstrating, you're leading into this culture where people are going to be compliant and not take risks. And your very actions are the ones, or your lack of actions, perhaps in some cases, are the ones that are holding back the thing that you want. And so, once again, we're back to the story of it starts with the leader, that we have to take on that responsibility first, just as you were talking about earlier.
I've seen both extremes of, very high functioning teams and teams where fear was a factor. And yeah, it's easy to start to see then, things you quote about companies that outperform other companies. Culture drives so much of an organization's performance. Obviously, strategy is important, but you can have the best strategy with a terrible culture and you'll never get where a company has the potential to get to.
Let's talk a little bit specifically about some of the things that are going on around development there at Parker Adventist, whether, formal, informal, mentoring, coaching. Talk to us a little bit about the things that you see going on, the things that you have in place, the things that you're excited about, maybe even some of the things that you hope to see improve.
I spend time with our leadership. So in the hospital setting, we have vice presidents, we have directors, we have managers and supervisors beyond that. My immediate leadership team is about 45 people, vice presidents, managers, directors. I mean, we have gone off site numerous times to do team building. And we start with doing personality profiling, analysis, and not just how do you normally show up to work, but we have some assessment tests that show how do you react under stress, and spend a lot of time talking about that as a leadership team. First of all, so that people see, yeah, there's people in the room that are exactly like me from a personality standpoint. There's people that are exact opposites, and drawing on all those talents. So we spend time as well talking about and getting vulnerable about things we do well and things that we don't do well as a leadership team. Because I know that if I gain the respect of those leaders, it's going to transcend and diffuse to the frontline employees. Sometimes I get more credit than I deserve, but having that relationship with those leaders is crucial. A number of my senior leadership team have had executive coaches, and that's a lot about self-awareness and just learning your own personality and how you can be more effective. That involves 360s, that involves regular check-ins with a coach. So I've had the good fortune of having an executive coach, and quite frankly, they've been instrumental in helping me succeed as a leader. Sometimes when you do a 360 and you get tough feedback, it's hard to take, but If it's the truth, it's something you have to deal with.
Well, when I hear all of that, I just think of the same word over and over again: invest, 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 invest. You're talking about time, you're talking about energy, and you're talking about money. So when it comes to reporting back to a board, have you ever had to fight battles for, hey, this is how that we're making these investments? Or have you always worked with boards that were like, sure, absolutely, no problem, absolutely do that?
I have not been in situations where people argued a lot with the investment, because at times when we go offsite with a coaching organization to do, and we usually have external coaches that help us with these team buildings. Number one, because they bring the skill around the tools. And I've known some people that really know those tools, and not just, okay, here's your profile, but here's your strengths, weaknesses. Here's how you're going to work really well with this person. Here's how you're going to struggle. So they really bring it off the page. But fortunately, I've worked for organizations, including the health system I work for today, that's been very much an advocate of executive coaching. So we've had the chance to work with an organization, and I would defend it even without that support, to say you have to grow people's skills and knowledge. And if you do that, it accelerates the opportunity for the company to advance. If you don't invest in your people, there's a price for that. So there's a price either way, whether you spend the money or you don't.
That's well said. There's a price either way. All right, let's talk about the mom test. We mentioned earlier that people are always watching. But I think this is an interesting idea that you and I got a chance to talk about a little bit earlier when we were visiting. I just love for people to hear about that, how you came to that, and how you see it today.
I was a healthcare leader for quite a few years, really before I ever had any serious health conditions myself, which I haven't really had. But my parents both went through quite a bit of healthcare. My dad, for sure, and it probably made, no doubt, made me a better leader. Not even probably. My dad went through heart surgery and then was diagnosed with brain cancer, and so he had a lot of healthcare in the last 5 years of his life. So I sat, he was in the intensive care unit after his cardiac surgery for 9 days, which was probably unusual, but he had some other challenges going on. And sitting there as a patient family member, interacting with the staff, seeing the patient family side of that situation made me a better leader. And I started using, you could call it the dad test, the mom test. It's really about telling our employees, I want every patient to get the same kind of care that I would want my family to get, whether it's my mother, my father, my daughter, my wife. Everybody's entitled to that. And so that's what I preach to our team. They understand it, they get it, because we should build the experience and the environment that we want our family to experience.
The way you articulated as you started, you said made you a better leader. Can you say a little bit more specifically? Because you can see, like, okay, now I'm experiencing what we do on essentially on the other side. And this would be a great way for all of us to inform the way we build this healthcare organization. Are there any other ways in which kind of that experience informed the way that you lead?
I told some of our team here today, before I had kids, I had employees show up and say, well, my child is sick and I got to stay home. Be like, okay, come on, suck it up and come to work. And then I had kids. It changed my perspective. I think it's the same way with being a patient, seeing our industry as a healthcare leader from the perspective of a patient family. My dad was on a lot of medications when he was going through heart surgery and then radiation and lots of treatment for his cancer. My mother was a pharmacist for him. I mean, she knew every medication, she knew when he should take it. And what I witnessed was sometimes people would listen to what she said and sometimes they wouldn't. And when they didn't listen to her, bad things could happen. My brother called me one time just very exasperated, saying they keep giving our dad his blood pressure medication and his blood pressure was too low already. And he said every time he gets out of bed, he hits the floor. I said, go find the hospitalist and ask him to discontinue that medication. I mean, I knew that because I work in healthcare, but it is just that perspective of sitting there and watching what our industry does from my own family and seeing sometimes people nailed it and sometimes they didn't. And so it's just being able to kind of put people in the patient's perspective, and not having been there before that. I had an idea. I listened to families. I've also had a sister who's been through cancer treatment 4 times, and hearing her, say what we do well and what she never wants to see again, it just gives you a totally different perspective as a leader of trying to coach leaders to say, we need to take great care of that patient. And here's why, because I've been on the other side of this.
Certainly, the healthcare industry is an interesting one in that it seems to be in the news almost on a regular basis for one reason or another. I could pick any number of other industries, and once every 3 or 4 years they hit the news cycle, but that's not the case with the healthcare industry. It seems to show up again and again and again. So, as you're living and leading in that industry, and you look at who you're leading, you look at your organization, you look forward, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges and opportunities for you as an organization leading in this extremely unique industry?
We have post COVID seen a significant change in the supply of registered nurses. We knew there was going to be a gap, but COVID did help people make the decision to leave the industry. So a lot of nurses who were towards the end of their career decided, I don't need this. I can afford to go do something else or retire. And so we lost a workforce that there's been forecasted gaps between supply and demand for years. It just really accelerated that situation. And I think there's people that have watched healthcare. I still believe it's a great industry to be in, to work in. It's very rewarding, but it's a challenge. It is the number one challenge, I believe, facing our industry.
Even in sharing what you did just there, I think for somebody like myself who's not in the industry, my first thought would be, well, how do you get more people to come back into the industry? But the idea that there are also some other levers, like, okay, how can we efficiently run this hospital? Could we get so good that we need 10% fewer nurses than we need previously? Not that that would have been our choice, but our hand's been forced. And with necessity being the mother of invention, perhaps that gets us there faster, even though the circumstances are unfortunate. I would have never thought about how do we do it with less, but of course that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think it's for years, this industry's tried to move towards having registered nurses work at the top of their license. And that just means, if it doesn't take their expertise or their experience, should they be doing the task? So, can you put more support around a registered nurse and have them take more patients safely? Which the answer to that is yes, there's ways to spread their expertise, but obviously, you have to teach the skill of delegation. And some people are good at that. Some people want to do it, touch the patient themselves. And so those are all skills you have to build in people. But yes, this is an industry that's going to have to figure out a new way to staff hospitals. And that's what we're working on.
Yeah, very well said. Is there anything that we haven't touched based on that you wanted to make sure that you took some time for us to talk about?
I think it is going back to what you said early on is I think sometimes we make leadership very difficult. And in a lot of ways, it's pretty simple concepts that make people successful. When we have new leaders, I try to coach them on people go one of 3 ways usually as a leader. They will go a fear-based route. They will go the route of becoming personal friends with their employees. And the third opportunity is the hard one, that's earning people's respect. Having that environment, having leaders who are respected, people keep showing up. And that's the amazing thing. Healthcare workers are really resilient. That surprises me all the time. But I think it is trying to help people see there's multiple ways you can go. There's really only one way that's really successful, and that's earning people's respect and having that high trust and highly transparent environment.
I agree. When you think about the highly transparent, I think about the reasons why people aren't. And there's a lot of different ones. Sometimes it's what's been modeled, sometimes it's how they're being coached. Sometimes it can lean into that fear-based leadership like you're talking about. There's one though that I'm finding that seems to be coming up a lot, although it's difficult for people to see it in the mirror, but it's this issue of insecurity. See leaders who are really kind of afraid to like fully put it out there, fully be themselves, fully engage. It's almost as if they look at leadership as a show instead of something genuine and real. And it's so disheartening to me when I see leaders approach it almost, in the end, if they're taking that approach, it's almost like they don't know it, but they're swapping out the word leadership for the word manipulation. Like, how can I get people to do things? And they think that that's what leadership is all about. They don't think it's about unleashing, like we were talking about earlier. How do we tap into the motivation that's already there? And it holds people back from just normal, healthy relationships. I think that sometimes people struggle to get to the transparency space because they're scared themselves. What if I'm really honest with people about the challenges we have? What if I'm honest with them about the challenge that they are? Hey, you're a challenge, and I'm afraid to tell you what a challenge you are, because what if you walk away and I really like all kinds of things. Anyway, I see that coming up again and again, and there's no pill for that. There's no easy solution for that. Becoming a more secure human being is kind of like the work of a lifetime. What a great opportunity that was to visit with Mike Goebel, and there were a number of things that he said that are worth remembering. I want to place a special emphasis on 3 of them. So the first one I want to talk about, he was talking about being influenced to get people in the right opportunities, the right roles, and the right environments for them to flourish. In that, he shared a story of somebody that he knew long ago who had gone through some development with Disney, the idea of Disney's approach to people management. He shared a story around that. And it really struck me that there is a mentality that goes into leading about where is the problem. We are so tempted when we see things not working out for others, we're so tempted to see them as the problem. And yet the Disney story and example that he learned from was with students that are coming over to America for 6 months at a time. And you can't just say, I'm sorry, it's not working out, that you really had to find a good space for them. And so this idea that when employees, when people that we are leading, when they're not working out, how quickly are we to go to the mirror for the solution? In other words, how quickly do we say, what can I do differently or better to help this person succeed? And then when we do that and it doesn't work out, do we then go back to the mirror and back to the mirror and back to the mirror? I would suggest that we as leaders need to go to the mirror many, many times before we conclude it's the other person, because people being in the right roles and circumstances, creating the right environments and culture, that is our job as leaders. And yes, perhaps eventually you could come to the conclusion that you don't have the right person in the organization. That can happen. But boy, do we go to that answer. I think we go to that answer too quickly. I think we don't oftentimes have enough humility and patience to say, what can I do differently? What can I do better? How can I help this person succeed? What if I were to look at every person that I lead and influence, every time that they are unsuccessful, what if I first saw that as a lack of performance on my part as a leader? What if that is where we started, instead of leaning towards blaming the folks that are not successful? I think that's a mentality that would really help us lead more effectively. A second thing I want to talk about is this idea of a culture of compliance. Mike talked about the idea of having compliance versus, the opposite of compliance is sincere engagement. And his example was when we are asking for a particular type of culture but not living it out ourselves as leaders, when we're not modeling it, that pushes towards compliance. And then when you get to compliance, then you reduce people's willingness to take wise risk, and how all of that can play into a very unhealthy and unproductive dynamic for an organization. And so I think it's worthwhile for us as leaders to think about, if we look at the values of the organization, as we look into the organization, really, are we seeing sincere engagement, or are we possibly seeing compliance? The question is, how do you know the difference? And I think the way you know the difference is how many stories of real life application are making their way back to you. How many stories are you hearing about people who are taking the core of the culture that you want to have and living it out in ways that if you were to make a little mini documentary about that story, it would show everybody in the organization, here is where we are headed. Are we hearing those kinds of stories regularly, or are those kinds of stories a rarity? I think ultimately when you have a culture of sincere engagement, that you have many more of those stories versus that culture of compliance. So we want to be on the lookout. We want to be, in a healthy way, scared of a culture of compliance, because it's not going to take us towards who we want to be and where we want to go. And as Mike pointed out, a culture of compliance can lead to a lack of taking the kind of risk we want people to be taking in order to help our organizations get better. Finally, I want to talk about empathy. Mike talked about the mom test, or it could be the dad test or the sister test. But in the world that he works in healthcare, what is it like to be on the other side? What is it like not to be an administrator, but to be a family member of a patient? And what is it like to be a patient? And I want to take it even one step further in the leadership challenge for us today, which is to say, also, what does it mean to be an employee? You heard it from Mike. He talked about becoming a better leader because of his experience as the family member of a patient. And I would say extend that again also to the employees. What can we do? How much better can we be as leaders if we will empathize, truly sit in the seat of, put the shoes on, of the clients and customers that we are trying to serve, but also, yes, of the employees who we are asking to get out there and do a great job. And so that leads me to the question I want to leave you with today, which is this: what are you doing proactively and intentionally to empathize with your customers and clients and the employees you are leading? This is Tim Spiker reminding you to be worth following and to follow us wherever you receive your podcasts. If you've heard something valuable today, please share our podcast with your friends and colleagues. And if you're up for it, leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening.